Sara Sharif was murdered by the people who were supposed to be looking after her. The court heard there were many missed opportunities to protect her. Why does this little girl's story feel like one we've heard too many times before? We'll ask the Children's Commissioner. Live from Broadcasting House, this is Newsnight with insights and interviews. Today, the father and stepmother of 10-year-old Sara Sharif were found guilty of her murder. Sara was subjected to horrific suffering for more than 2 years. It's a case which will remind many people of Victoria Colombier, who was aged just 8 when in 2001 she was murdered by relatives after months of torture. In 2007, 17-month-old Peter Connolly, known as Baby P, was found dead with catastrophic injuries. In 2020, 16-month-old Star Hobson was murdered by her mother's partner. At multiple points, the pair managed to deflect attention from social services. Star's great-grandfather, David Fawcett, told Newsnight how today's news brought back very sad memories.
It brings it back home because what's just happened today, the trial, it's more or less 3 years ago today since the trial of Star was going on like. So it brings it all back, really. It's just so upsetting.
Does it make you want to think about Star and maybe sort of make a gesture or do something?
Oh, yes, because I mean, this time of year anyway with Star, it's like Christmas. It was one of those occasions where we just wish she were here with us. So yeah, it brings it all back home, and it must be the same for Sara's family. What they've had to go through.
Well, yeah, because Sara's mum put out a statement calling her angel and saying how much this means to her. That must be sort of similar sort of feelings that you've had to experience.
When I heard this news, you just think, is this going to keep on happening? We thought, well, when it happened with Star, social services and all this, it all something to get sorted out. And you wouldn't hear of these things happening as much, but it just seems to keep on happening. I mean, there's been several murders since we lost Star. As I said, when this one came up, I thought, it's children again. It seems to be children that suffer.
What do you think it is about the system? Because we're meant to have a system of child protection. What do you think it is about the system that means this has happened again?
It's communication, communicate with the police. As soon as you see any signs of abuse, they should be on the ball there, but because they weren't for Star, and obviously they weren't for Sara. So when they made these changes, they just need all to communicate, with teachers at school, the police, social services, but they seem to just, I don't know, it's like something's missing.
How does it feel, just on a human level, knowing that there were moments where this absolutely awful thing could have been prevented, knowing that there's just a moment where history could have gone in a completely different direction?
Yeah, it could have done. I mean, just that. If they'd have acted properly, the social services, Star would have still been with us today, but they obviously didn't. They didn't do the jobs properly. And after what's happened now with little Sara, they're still not doing the jobs properly.
And I noticed when we were starting to get ready for this interview, just behind you in the room, there is a star on the wall. Is that for Star?
That's for Star, yeah.
Right. And what does that mean to you?
It's just, she's with me all the time. I've got a little star on my jacket that I work with. I always, carry a star around. It's just the symbol of, she'll always be a part of us. I just try to cope with it. It's like, we'll never get over Star. We'll never get over losing Star, but you've just got to learn to live with it, and that's what I try to do the best.
And what's the thing that's helped you most to live with it?
I just think of the moments that we had with Star. sometimes, you know, it's like, you know, if I'm feeling, I just think of the good times what we had. You know, the happy time. I can't, you know, it's such a sad thing and awful tragedy what happened, but I try to outdo it with the good points. And I actually love to watch little videos of her, and it's you know, it just makes me feel good.
What's your favourite video?
Where I played the guitar on a couple of videos with her, and she's singing and dancing, and you know, she's you could see how happy she was at that time. It was such a happy period, because it was the time when she was actually living with. She lived with us for 3 months, and it was that 3 months was just so amazing. Star and Frankie were isolated. They were taken away from us. Went to live about 8 miles away from where we're living now, and we never were getting any contact. And it was that what was so hard, because the phones were blocked. It was, you know, not by Frank. It was the monster that was doing all the. She didn't want anything to do with us, and you know, she wanted to keep Star away from us, and I think it were all down to that. What you know, we just found it out because we didn't know what were going off. Frank, we tried his best to get Frankie away from her life, but she was sort of so controlled. She sort of believed everything she said, and it was just so sad.
Oh, well, David, we really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
David Fawcett there. So why can't we stop cases like this from happening? I'm joined down the line from Merseyside by the Children's Commissioner, Rachel D'Souza. Hi, Rachel. So we've had decades and decades of work put into child protection, but why do we still see horrendous cases like this happening?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the first thing I want to say is that tonight what we're thinking about is Sara Sharif's broken, tortured little body, the last terrible hours of her life that we've heard about. And I think we have to say that her death, like Star's death, she was killed, murdered in a terrible way by those who are meant to love her the most. And there will always be wicked people who are meant to care for their own children and instead torture them and kill them. So there's that reality, but there is no question in the Sara Sharif case, like a different but the same problem with the Star's case, that the services that were meant to be the safety net that would keep her safe, get her away from this, failed. And my frustration, and I think what I'm hearing in your question, is that we must not say, oh, lessons must be learnt, oh, we need multi-agency working, oh, we need a review. We actually need change and we need action now. And in Sara's case, there are some really clear actions at the systemic level, as well as the accountabilities of those involved, but some really clear system level, government and local,
spell those out for us now really clearly.
Okay, so in Sara's case, what we saw was the school picked up the issue. They were worried about the bruises. They referred her. Sara was known to social care from before she was born. That means everybody knows. The data shows that you are 6 times more likely to end up dead, frankly, killed, in the murdered. And yet, when she was referred, her case was dropped in 6 days. Now, the reason that's been given is that they didn't have the data. We should not be in a situation in this country that we are in, that social care areas don't have the data or share the data between health and education.
And so why didn't they have the data though? Like, whose fault is that?
So because I've consistently to Secretaries of State said we need a unique identifier and proper data sharing, because when children leave their areas, the data doesn't necessarily follow them and doesn't automatically. There are systems that can be put in place nationally, should be put in place. Now, there's a Children's and Wellbeing Bill has been put forward by the government, and in the manifesto, they agreed with me and said we should have a unique identifier and proper data systems for data sharing between services. I really must see that in the new Children and Wellbeing Bill that's coming in. So that's one thing.
You talked about speaking to secretaries of state and raising this idea of a unique identifying number.
That's my job.
But how many years have you been raising that? And in other words, how many secretaries of state had a chance to introduce it and didn't?
So I've been in my role since 2021, and I've raised it with every single one, because I started raising it in context with attendance and the children who've gone missing from attendance roles. So that's, I think, 5 secretaries of state. Now, Labour have put this in their manifesto. I was pleased to see that. Now my challenge to this government, to this Secretary of State, is we need proper data sharing, a unique identifier. We need to be in this century to keep, using the tech of this century to keep these children safe. So that's one thing. The second thing is, in this case, that just like shouts out is basically when the school recognised that she had bruises and that she was, at serious risk and had talked to social care, the father took her out of school and home educated her. We must have a home education register. We don't have one now. Again, every Secretary of State since I've been in this role, I've pushed them to say you must have a home register. So what this government is saying, they are going to have one, and it's going to be in the Children and Wellbeing Bill. Well, I want to see that happen. It must happen. But secondly, in that Children and Wellbeing Bill, it must say that if a child is suspected of abuse, they cannot be educated at home. Being in school is a safeguard, and actually they are safer under the eyes of teachers. You learn at school, but you're safe and so much more. We cannot let a child who is at risk, from the very people who are meant to care for her at home, go be educated at home. It's madness. So that's the second thing I want to see.
Okay.
And there's more.
Well, let's focus on the homeschooling thing. Okay, so you're saying even just the suspicion of abuse should be a reason to veto a kid being taken out of school to be homeschooled? Just the suspicion?
Yes, because frankly, yes, because look, it's your legal right as a parent to home educate. There are many people who home educate really, really well. I don't want to get in their way. They're fantastic. But look, if there's suspicion of abuse of a child or harm to a child, and so they have to go to school. Well, actually, school is a good place for them to be anyway. Any child should be able to be at school until it's resolved. So look, it's just a safeguard. It must be put into place. And the third thing I'd say, and I really, I think now it's time we do this again. We've got to recognise we're in the 21st century. In assault laws, Irfan Sharif, when he called the police, said, I've legally punished my daughter and she's dead. It turned my blood cold that people think you can legally punish a child and her be dead. Why did he think that? Because in assault laws, there is a clause that allows reasonable chastisement of children. Now, that means that they have less protection from assault than animals or adults. That clause must be removed. It came into place in the 19th century when a teacher killed a child through beating them, and so they put the reasonable chastisement in to protect children. It's time for that to go, because we cannot have. That would be pretty symbolic, though, wouldn't it? Because I don't think child murderers are studying the old legislation, are they? Right. I actually think it's a slippery slope, and he actually used those words. I've legally disciplined my child. It goes around. If it stops someone going down a slippery slope, then I think it's really, really important. And no, it might not have, but it might have helped, and it might have changed the narrative. As a former head teacher of 20 years, I'd have parents say to me, my child's misbehaving, will you beat them? I'd say, absolutely not, it's against the law. And they'd say, well, no, it's legal to do it, I'll do it at home. And sometimes those were children with disabilities and special educational needs. This is a far more prevalent and held view than you would imagine, and we have to deal with that. So there are 3 things immediately, and on top of that, and I think what these things underpin is that professionals need to be working together, sharing information, And if in any doubt, the child's safety must come first.
And is there a question of resources here? Because local authorities who do all this stuff have had their budget squeezed for the last few years. Does more money need to go into this?
So look, I will always argue for more money for children, and particularly for safeguarding children. But what I've got to say is I've given government a job here about some of the levers they need to pull to keep children safe. Council chiefs, council bosses need to make sure that they're giving the resource that's needed to proper safeguarding and keeping children safe in these acute services. So yes, they need funding, but they also need to be making sure that these things are happening properly, just as social workers need to be having the level of curiosity to ask the questions, and as professionals across services need to work together. So there's a lot to be done, but there are some very, very clear actions, and I want to see those actions. I want never again to mean never again. It's almost 20 years since Victoria Climbier's death. That's so remarkably similar to Sara's. We need now to draw the line, never again, and the way to get never again is through action.
Rachel, thank you very much. Now, Rachel Wardle, who's the Executive Director responsible for Children's Social Services at Surrey County Council, said, "We are resolute in our commitment to protecting children and we're determined to play a full and active part in the forthcoming review alongside partner agencies to thoroughly understand the wider circumstances surrounding Sara's tragic death." And if you've been affected by any of the issues that we're discussing tonight, you can contact the BBC Action Line on 0800 077 077. Now, many have tried, but few, maybe none, have succeeded in overhauling Britain's planning system to get a few more houses built as a result. The Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, will give it another go tomorrow when she unveils Labour's reforms. And there's a lot riding on this because it's the centrepiece of the government's attempts to boost economic growth. So, Nick, what are we going to be hearing tomorrow?
Well, Adam, a very big day tomorrow for Angela Rayner and a lot for Miranda and Paul, our panellists, to be talking about. So a big day and one big fact. And that big fact is this government is pledging to build 1.5 million homes in the course of this Parliament. And as you say, Adam, the Deputy Prime Minister is making clear that you can only do that if you massively reform planning laws. So let's take a look at what we're going to see. So in the first place, we are going to see mandatory local housing targets across England. And secondly, yes, greater building on the green belt by identifying what is called grey belt land. Now, this is sensitive. The green belt was originally designed to prevent urban spread. And what Angela Rayner is saying in terms of building on the green belt is the first choice should be to build on brownfield sites. So that's previously developed land in urban areas. But when you cannot meet your housing targets by building on those sorts of areas, then you need to follow the route on building on what is described as lower quality green belt land. That is the grey belt. I should say what the government will be saying is this is old petrol stations. It's not the sort of rolling plains of the Chiltern Hills. Now, on those mandatory local housing targets, if, let's say, Borsetshire County Council said, we've got a marvellous target, it's 0%, Angela Rayner would be able to say, no, not good enough, because you have to meet two tests. One, you have to be meeting your local housing needs, and two, you have to be ensuring affordability. And if they say 0%, then Angela Rayner has powers to intervene.
OK, years of storylines for the Archers. Right, now let's discuss it with tonight's panel. We've got Miranda Green, not Greenbelt, former advisor to the Lib Dems and now Deputy Opinion Editor at the Financial Times, and Paul Scully, former Business Minister in the Conservative government. Hello to you both. Now, Paul, you've been a local councillor and you've been on a planning committee. Can you give us an example that just brings to light how this system we've got actually works? Because it's so jargony and policy this and framework that. Give us a story that we will all understand.
So, look, you sit as a councillor and you get your paperwork a few weeks beforehand, plenty of time to read, to ask questions. You're not allowed to, what they call, fetter your interest. So you're not allowed to declare you are going to definitely vote against something, because you've got to hear all the arguments. It's quasi-judicial process. However, I have seen councillors come in, pick up the paper from the back of the room, sit there, flick through it and think, I've got to ask a question because I've got to look busy, the residents are watching. And so it doesn't always work the way it's supposed to work. I've also sat the other side of the table because I ran a company where part of our work was actually working with companies like big shopping centre companies and student accommodation companies to secure planning permission and try to persuade the councillors why this is a strategically good idea. And again, when I remember sitting with someone who was investing £1.5 billion into one scheme, and he was watching councillors arguing about what they should call the entries for this building using Harry Potter school houses. Imagine this, £1.5 billion of reasons why this guy was so frustrated.
Basically, councillors can act in a quite whimsical way.
It can be, and they need to have protection for their residents that they represent, but they shouldn't be there just to play politics and just be there to, as I say, look busy because they're worrying about the next election. It is all about a strategic approach.
And all of that stuff, Miranda, has been catnip for Liberal Democrats, who can scoop up votes by opposing a big housing development.
Well, and the Green Party, which, you know, won in 2 Conservative areas in July, you know, through opposing all sorts of development, including housing as well. So, I mean, it's really interesting when you look at the new balance of the House of Commons and this opportunity that Labour has at the beginning of a parliament to do something big. And in a sense, you know, the opposition parties, we know, will object locally to some of these developments. That's what they do. It would be in their political interest to continue doing so, frankly. But actually for Labour, it's a question of, do they decide, OK, well, you know, some of these new rural Labour MPs are toast, frankly. You know, you look at the farmers' protests again this week, you look at their desire to do, you know, this opening up the green belt, grey belt definition. Some of those Labour people who got elected in rural and semi-rural constituencies, they may be sort of sacrificial lambs, let's face it. But if you take the political hit now, and you can deliver, or at least start to deliver on this house building target, you can say that Labour's come in with a programme to open up the housing market, produce more social housing, which is really crucial, as well as commercially available housing. They've got to do something quite fast, so it's build, baby, build, really, as far as Labour ministers are concerned.
I mean, can anything be done quickly in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I disagree with what Angela Rayner seems to be talking about tomorrow is the minimum house building target. She's actually pushed that away from London, which is where the big demand is. So actually she probably needs to do that. There is resource that is needed for planning officers, more planning officers to get the applications through quicker. We haven't got enough construction workers to build the things even if we can get planning.
So actually the planning system itself sounds like it might be a bit of a red herring here,
no,
or at least just one herring amongst lots more.
It's a first stage and it's a big stage. Because if you think about it, there was a report last year from a guy called Sam Dimitri in his and Britain Remade when he talked about the Lower Thames crossing, that just to get planning cost more for planning than the longest road bridge in the world to be built and completed. That is not sustainable.
And let's not talk about the HS2 Bat Tunnel. Miranda, we talked about the green belt and the grey belt. What's your understanding about what this new concept of the grey belt is? And do you think the grey belt could be in the eye of the beholder? Rather than being a sort of scientifically provable thing?
Well, it has seemed quite subjective, so I think it will be really good if they nail it down tomorrow. To me, it seems extremely sensible. You know, if you've got, for example, it was explained to me by Dan Norris, who's, you know, West of England Mayor for Labour. You know, around Bristol, you've got really unattractive bits around the road system there. You know, as Nick was saying, this isn't sort of, you know, prime, beautiful English countryside that we all cherish. This is really kind of scrubby waste ground in between other developments. Why not use that land? That seems really, really sensible. I think where it gets more difficult is, you know, as Paul was alluding to, some of these problems with actually delivering on the skills gaps. You know, they're saying we lack 150,000 construction workers to actually get the things built. You know, there are delivery is going to be a lot harder than it sounds.
On the grey belt before that building in the green belt, because the grey belt is part of the green belt, will be subject to the golden rules. So point number one, as I was saying, you try brownfield first. Secondly, if that doesn't work, then you go to the grey belt. But then the houses have to be affordable and there has to be the local infrastructure.
But that's really important. But what does affordable mean? This is also really important.
There's all sorts of definitions. But Paul, I was going to ask you, because Miranda's point there about this grey belt, that it's the unattractive bits. Apologies to anyone in Bristol who we just called unattractive there. Their neighbourhoods, we didn't mean it like that. That sounds like kind of quite low-hanging fruit if you wanted. Why did you guys not do that?
It is because there's a lot of Conservatives, frankly. It's a lot of Conservatives that represent those areas. That again, it's that short-termism of I'll be toast if I was mentioning that. I can say this because I was a Labour MP, a London MP, sorry, and so I didn't have any. So I didn't have any of that position in my particular area. But there are certain things some MPs can't say, and it sometimes then takes the other party to come in and make the difficult choice, and they can say, now we can get some housing built. But the other thing we need to do is work out how to get developers to build out their developments quicker. In Thamesmead, for example, they want to build 35,000 houses around that area, but it's going to take them 30 years. Part of the reason is because if they build them too quickly, their market price goes down, so they don't get as much profit. How can Treasury work with the Mayor of London to release that land at a different cost profile, so make sure they can get the money and build quicker?
I think this is really interesting because also, you know, the housing developers, the really big companies, this isn't really the prettiest part of capitalism sometimes. And, you know, the Competition and Markets Authority actually have looked into the big house builders and said, you know, there's not enough quality there. And there's some very strange arrangements where private companies then come in and milk the residents with fees for things that perhaps should be actually handed over to local authorities. So there are concerns about whether some of this is a charter for the really big development companies. So I'd want to see the government being really, really tough in scrutinising how the market actually works and delivers.
Big philosophical question here. Can you imagine in, I don't know, 25 years, 50 years time, once all the millennials and the Gen Z are kind of in power, that actually we've got a total mindset shift about building, and actually everyone's just much more comfortable with stuff being built everywhere, and this whole like romantic post-war field, like you can see some of the fields behind us, all that has gone.
Well, that's, I mean, look,
as a concept.
To a point, but look,
because the green belt is an ancient idea, really.
Well, yeah, but you still need some lungs around the city, those green lungs around the city. So having the balance, and it is a difficult balance to strike. I wouldn't like to be there doing it myself because it is a real unenviable task to do. But they will need not just big, you know, the slums of the skies that they call skyscrapers and tower blocks and stuff. You need family housing, so you need a mix of homes as well. You want some countryside living as well as town and city living. So it's a difficult balance to strike.
And Miranda, have you seen any examples where actually people have been won over, and actually all these old school battles we're talking about between NIMBYs and YIMBYs, they've managed to sort of get rid of that and everyone's kind of come together?
I don't know if I can think of any examples where it has worked, but I think if they're clever about it, they will get buy-in. For example,
bribe people?
Well,
literally buy them in.
Well, bribery's never a bad thing, right? So if you actually sort of disable some of the arguments against, it can work. So if you say, OK, we've heard you, the local infrastructure has to be in place, because that's something that people locally are worried about. You know, will there be enough GPs? Will there be enough school places? Although, of course, falling roles means primary schools are actually opening up. But, you know, so if you sort of say, OK, we've really looked at this carefully and we're going to actually do a better sharing of the land value that increases when you get planning permission, and we're going to take some of that money into providing for local communities. Yeah, bribery, why not?
They see the direct benefit.
Yeah, totally. And if you start saying, OK, all of this new stuff, it's all going to have solar panels on the roof, you then disable the environmental groups objecting, because it's like, well, how can you object? This is eco-friendly housing, you know. I think you really do have to do it cleverly to get agreement,
A lot to think about, and we'll see the details tomorrow. Thank you very much, all three of you. Right, we've just got time to have a quick look at the front pages on tomorrow's newspapers. The Daily Mail, that question we were asking the Children's Commissioner, why does this keep happening, over their coverage of Sara Sharif's death. A very similar message from the Daily Express, and a really heartbreaking picture of her there on their front page too. A combination of both those stories on the Daily Telegraph. Labour bids to bulldoze the home counties. I'm not sure what that claim is actually based on. There was another report this morning that the size of the grey belt would be the size of Surrey if you added it all together. Then if we look at The Guardian, they're talking about ministers to axe more than 10,000 civil service jobs in budget purge. We were talking the other night there about the start of the big spending review, and we said that you were going to start to see stories leaking out about what the consequences of that would be. There we go, 10,000 fewer civil servants potentially. And then if we look at the I newspaper, they're also talking about international affairs instead of planning. They're talking about new turmoil in the Middle East as neighbours launch attacks inside Syria. So just catching up on all the international game of chess that is happening in Syria after the downfall of the Assad regime. And a very quick look at the Financial Times. We had a sequel today in Westminster to the farmers' protest about the changes to inheritance tax. So they've got a big picture there of a farmer stood on the roof of a tractor, but there was no Jeremy Clarkson this time. Right, that is all for Newsnight tonight. Thank you very much for having me. Faisal will be here tomorrow, but for now, live from Broadcasting House, good night.